All right, so this week we wanted to talk about the importance of GPP, or general physical preparation, specifically for the weightlifting community. So I'm actually going to just kind of shift it on over to Nicole.
One thing that we know with Olympic weightlifters is it's a very regimented, strict program, right? We snatch, we clean, we jerk, we squat, we deadlift, and there are variations of those lifts built into the program. But a lot of times what athletes are missing is just being generally physically prepared, not only to handle those lifts as they stand from a strength and technique background, but physically in their bodies and the demand that all of that heavy weight training places on the body. And so allowing weightlifters or having weightlifters have a GPP phase throughout certain points of the year is very important, in my opinion, for longevity of sport and just being able to avoid certain plateaus at certain points in your training. So kind of taking a look at the physical side of it, weightlifters have a lot of chronic injuries that we see quite often. Whether it's hips, shoulders, knees, ankles, they just get beat down and feel broken a lot of the time. And a lot of the time they're training through those injuries because they think that that's the solution. When in reality, if we take a look at the overall programming scheme, there are ways to navigate through those injuries. And I think that GPP phases are a great way to kind of insert that in.
So it's funny because Olympic weightlifting statistically is like one of the safest sports that you can do. But the caveat to that is it's the safest acutely.
Yeah.
That does not include the chronic injuries like she alluded to. So what's kind of some of your first thoughts with chronic injuries in Ollie world?
My first thoughts are, in terms of injury, it's that lifters that get into the sport and then they kind of like do their time and they start getting kind of like quote unquote injured. It's sometimes because of a lack of GPP. They can't just handle this like sort of training density. And to me, it's like, again, another quote from Louis, it's like, you have to be in shape to lift weights. Like, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And lack of GPP and then lack of SPP too. I think people don't really like realize that. It's just kind of like do the 2 lifts, squat and pull, that's it. And then, drag that shit on for like 3 hours. But then again, as like their training regimen and their cycles keep going on and on and on, they just kind of like lose the intent of building armor. So building like hypertrophying the muscles that need to be hypertrophied, and so on and so forth. And again, no GPP sometimes, and then no understanding of the prehabilitative or pre-potentiating kind of things in the warm-up. I think that's kind of my first go-tos.
So it's ironic that we just have like an unbelievably perfect example of this with Phil, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, an absolute unit throughout his entire weightlifting career.
Yeah.
And then sustains that injury, that cuff tear. And what did he do with his training, which he was very public about documenting and posting and whatnot. What did he do?
He turned to GPP. He turned to rehab and things outside of the box, things that were no longer just sagittal plane movements, started getting into rotation, frontal plane stuff, and
tempo work, accommodation. Yep. And the 2 interesting things that stick out to me with all of this, because it's been a fascinating thing to watch. When that shit happened, when that injury happened, I said it out loud there. I was like, that's a wrap. that's fucking terrible. But
but then
all the other things that the dude's doing. But anyhow, to the point, he stuck with a lot of that GPP style of training and continued to do it once he was back to competition type of training. And he's at the exact same, if not a little bit higher strength. For the most part,
I would say a little bit higher
as he was pre-injury, which is amazing. I mean, that's wild. But
I mean, from my end, I don't even know the guy, but it's like he's still flinging weights and swinging weights around, and it's
there's a lot to be said for the GPP side of it and continuing with it. And I think that's the thing that people kind of forget. They're like, oh, well, I have to get 90 minutes of this program done, so I have to get all of this stuff in. But if you edit, and we started calling it movement prep, And so athletes don't look at it as a warm-up. Oh, I got to do warm-up. I got to do all this and that. No, it's your movement prep for the day based on what you're going to be doing that day, but it's different shit. It's using bands and it's putting your body in different positions. And we couple that at the end with different accessories. Sure, we're doing stuff to work the legs and stuff to work the back and stuff to work the shoulders, but we're trying to get our athletes to move differently. Every time we give an athlete a new program and they're like, oh my God, what is this? I'm like, be an athlete. Be an athlete. And I think something that people forget is football players spend time, basketball players, soccer players, traditional sports, they spend time in the weight room and then they spend time in practice on the field, on the court, wherever it might be. For weightlifters, our time in the weight room is the same as being on the field as much as it is being in the weight room compared to the traditional sports. So you need to find ways to do other shit besides the lifts that you compete in order to allow your body to sustain life in the sport.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my definition for all of that is increase your ability to tolerate variability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a key thing that I've latched onto.
Yep.
Yeah. Like, and GPP could mean anything that's getting you in shape.
Yes.
I mean, I'm more of a do as I say, not as I do. So it's like, even my shoulder rehab, I'm like tired as fuck sometimes. And I'm like, all right, maybe I should kind of like do more stuff. But then again, like my GPP would just be like, I don't know, walking in a yoke just to kind of like build tension or just, all around body, strength, or just practicing stuff I wouldn't normally do just so I don't forget things. And then again, going back to like SPP, that's when I could work the technique stuff. And that's where you could analyze your own technique through like slow-mo vids, because you need to slow-mo your shit, because it's, if you're going the 2.2 meters per second on the snatch, you're not going to catch that on just like an Instagram video. You got to see where you're breaking down and boom, attack that, and then do your own specific stuff pertinent to what you need to work on. So again, that could be part of the GPP kind of thing. If you're trying to navigate that, see what you need to do. And then that's how you still work your work capacity, work your technique, still, suboptimally build strength rather than continuing to display strength all the time, et cetera, et cetera.
And so I think a couple of like good indicators or benchmarks here for people to identify with this. When we say in good shape, we mean primarily a resting heart rate below 60 beats per minute.
Yeah.
That's something you can, work towards tangibly. HRV is scored and scaled in a lot of different ways now with all of the different technologies and wearables that are out there, but just thinking improved HRV from whatever it probably is for you. And then another one is sleep status, right? Like if your sleep is, chronically under 6 hours a night, if it's, chronically unable to get up and feel regenerated, shit like that. Those are things that you also build into your GPP because it's general physical preparation. So a lot of things, or a lot of athletes would benefit from something like almost just de-emphasizing the total amount of time you spend training, especially weightlifters who are notorious for 90 to 2 hour sessions.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe just you already have 2 hours of your day across the week blocked out for lifting. Cut that shit down to 45 or 60 minutes and then spend that next hour on sleep hygiene, on meal prep, on rehab, specific localized injuries, getting soft tissue treatment, all of these different things that aren't training, but they directly influence your training.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And to your point, that goes back to training density.
Yes.
Density can be poor if you're stretching shit out for 3 hours. That should be, again, your main lift should be like within the 40-minute mark. I mean, you're essentially almost detraining, you know what I mean? And that could be key. And that's where we go into our complexes.
Right.
Yep.
I think that's a big one too.
Yep. A big one. I agree. Because you want to find a way to get that volume in to create that work capacity without completely beating yourself down with.
Yeah. Not to interject, but all that volume with very light loads.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
Under 50% of whatever your typical training percentages are. Like those are key. The weights have to be light enough to create that true metabolic and then hypertrophy type effect.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they're light enough, you're training other shit on the force velocity curve. So you're killing how many birds with one stone.
Yep,
right.
Absolutely.
And then after that, your heart rate should be kind of up, like hella up.
Yeah.
And again, it's just increasing the bandwidth. And we can give specific examples, even though I don't think they really carry much value. But with things like this, it's when the meet gets extended because of backup and the shit's running behind, so you have to alter your warm up, and then you're lifting at 11:30 at night. Like, these are the types of things that you can't develop simply just banging weights based off of an Excel sheet. You have to develop bandwidth. There has to be a spectrum, and all of the extraneous factors in the intense sports, such as bodybuilding, powerlifting, and Olympic weightlifting, they get overly myopic, and they start to ignore all these different parameters. You're battling chronic injuries where you sleep like shit and you eat Taco Bell 3 times a week. What do you expect is going to happen? You're 34 now. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, yes, the training piece is obviously important, but do other shit. GPP can also just mean going and doing different activities and endeavors for a little bit, just to give yourself both a physical and mental reprieve.
Trick the athletes. So we call it reactivation.
There you go.
2 to 3 weeks, and you don't get to touch a barbell. Like, there's no snatch, there's no clean, there's no deadlift, there's squats and deadlifts are in there, but you're using, kettlebells, or you're finding different, from the kickstand position, or, different variations, sumo squats, things like that, stuff that is completely out of your general scope and range, and provides that same, metabolic conditioning response and things like that. But it's complete and total, just break down nothing that you're used to doing in any traditional program to allow your body to build itself back up and be prepared for the next phase.
Yeah. And that goes back to the thought of like adolescent, or like just youth athletes, like pitchers.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
I was going to mention that. Yeah.
Specialize.
Yeah.
Why your 13-year-old's elbow hurts? Well, you've been fucking doing travel ball, in-season baseball, this baseball, like
visual lessons.
And I mean, it's similar to like the athletes I work with at work. I mean, they'll kind of do something similar. A lot of people are keen on like just ollie lifts because they just love it. But then like, say, sometimes you call it just like, or I call it like fuck it up Fridays, where they'll just do some crazy, just like WOD, just to keep up high intensity. But then the workouts are only like 20 minutes. But then it's like, they are banging out just like metabolic, just like conditioning work. And that goes back to helping them just lift weights. They don't get so tired anymore, especially when they hit like 80% and stuff like that. So
absolutely.
Same concept. But I guess like switching gears here, talking about that stuff, like how do you, Nicole, specifically, like, what's the importance of like the non-barbell work in terms of like the prehab or all that? How do you put that in the mix?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very much athlete dependent. You're gonna take a look at if they have any, chronic injuries that they deal with and things like that, and where their weaknesses are. Do they have a positional weakness? Do they have an issue pulling versus pushing and things like that? Are they more hamstring dominant, more quad dominant? And then using those specifics for that athlete, and then giving them kind of the antithesis of what they need, right? So if they're super quad dominant, then we're going to work to load the hamstrings in different ways than just pulling, because I like incorporating them, into that warm-up movement prep, and then finding ways to add them into accessories. Some things that I've been doing with a couple of athletes are building in some intraset stuff. So once they get to their working weights of their squats, using that rest time to do something completely different that isn't, going to fatigue their squats, but it's also going to build in some more work capacity as well, and get some of that prehab stuff in there. So that way they're not feeling like, oh, well, I got to do all of this stuff in my warm up and make sure my shoulder feels good. Well, no, we can add in some, banded shoulder stuff in between your squats, so you're still getting that added benefit of those movements.
Yeah. And again, still like going back to Phil's stuff, it's like he'll pressing hella weight with like an offset still, you know what I mean? And you're still getting that specific preparedness, but you're training like overhead stability. Yep. So it doesn't have to like drop the barbell. Let's do some banded ER like that. Waste of fucking time. So
yeah.
Yep. Agreed. The biggest thing is, if your body knows what to expect, it's no longer going to adapt to anything different. And you need to be able to bulletproof your body to survive these sports.
Yeah. I think the way I look at it is less than like 2% of the population is like a truly no shit elite athlete or physical capable.
Yeah.
So most people that train diligently and are competitive even are going to reach their physical peak.
Yeah.
So we can spend all the time in the world trying to jam that physical peak. That's probably all you got, man.
Yeah.
That's probably all you got. So rather than just trying to jam that same thing over and over again, without any kind of, production or improvement, why not just try to fill in on the back end with areas and items that are independently deficient or intolerant?
Right.
And you can fill this in with shit like GPP. Run a 2-week GPP cycle for every 12 weeks of training. Yeah. That's an easy one to follow.
Right.
And just do whatever. And I think it's a great time to, emphasize things like curiosity and just movement, exploration and shit like that. That's great, man. Make it more of like a mental investment type of relationship. There's a lot to that, So all that being said, I think it ultimately just boils down to understanding that there's a definite need to just be non-specific sometimes. And when you're in a sport like Ollie, you will 100% of the time, even if somebody's programming wrong for you, hit your quota, so to speak, for what you should and need to do on the training side. What's not going to be programmed for you is what we're discussing. And it has, a lot of redeemable value.
Conjugate fanboy again, but again, your pyramid is only as tall as your base.
I love that quote because, that's absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like if GPP is the key component to widening the base, then you will break through whatever plateau you think you might have. But then again, not to say that you got to fucking train. We're not saying that at all.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. GPP it's got to be earned, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the way again that I try to treat it with extended programming. It's like GPP's got to be earned. So we know that the density and the just sheer taxing that's in the programming is sufficient.
Yeah.